So we're here today with Ron Barshop, the CEO of Beacon Clinics. Ron, so good to be with you today for this podcast.
Oh, Chris, thank you for putting this on. This is really a visionary thing to do. We're going to be talking about a visionary today. What you're doing for these families, for the people that watch, is I admire you.
It's been a lot of fun just to work on it just behind the scenes with you a little bit ahead of time. Mm-hmm. A little bit before I start the podcast, just share a little bit about your grandfather. There's a lot of entrepreneurship that runs in your family. Joe Barshop was your grandfather.
Yeah.
And I think he was known for starting a produce company. He actually drove down to Mexico and would buy bananas and put them in the back of a station wagon and bring them back to San Antonio.
Well, that's where the visionary starts in my family, was with my grandfather. He went to St. Louis, and it was the only place in America that was doing condominiums. And he decided that San Antonio needed to condominiumize the back of the fruit truck sales that was happening to the grocery stores in San Antonio. So they bought some land. He was chairman until the day he died, from the 30s to the day he died. And the produce terminal is still around today, and they're basically the distributors for the grocery community in San Antonio and throughout South Texas. So it used to be go to a certain part of El Mercado, which is now known as El Mercado, sell out of the back of your truck. The grocery stores would infill.
So that was condominium of the cars, the back of the cars, or how exactly?
Yeah, well, they built
bit.
Banana rooms, they built pineapple rooms, they built rooms for all of these produce to ripen, which you need. You can't just sell a green banana to a grocery store. They don't want to buy it green; they want to buy it a little bit yellow. So, but imagine every kind of vegetable, every kind of produce. That's where it all happened. It was from that location, and that was before medical took over as number two. That was number two to tourism, produce, and agricultural distribution, even bigger than the military for many, many decades.
And so your dad grew up in this very entrepreneurial environment where he's watching people sell produce out of the back of trucks. Mm-hmm. He's seeing people really sweat to put things together and make things happen, and have a creative vision.
3 a.m. His day. I still wake up at 2:30 every morning to this day. I'm 58, since I was a little boy, because Mom would grind these oranges on these old orange juice machines that are extremely loud, and that machine was right on the other side of my bedroom. So every morning he'd get to work at 3 o'clock, and he'd stay till about 8 or 9, and that was a full day. But that's when the rail was unloading the produce. That's when they're doing their buying and their selling and their haggling, and they had product for the week.
So your dad's been gone for about 20 years now. Your dad was Phil Barshop.
Yes.
And his brother was Sam Barshop.
Yes.
And together they grew up in this environment, this entrepreneurial family environment, and they ended up founding La Quinta, among other things.
Yeah.
La Quinta Motor Ends. And, there's always the joke out there that you hear, La Quinta, what does it mean? How did they come about starting La Quinta?
So in his early 20s, he opened his first roadway inn. They had, even though they worked in the early mornings doing bananas, in the afternoons they would build their real estate business, their roadway business. So they got the franchise. They quickly became the largest franchiser in the country
of roadway motor
inns. Roadway inns, which was a budget motel. They went to the owner with their business partner. So my grandfather was, every dime he had, he put into real estate deals. So he was a junkie for deals. And one of his partners was Trammell Crow, very well-known Dallas developer who's was building buildings in San Antonio and used my grandfather as his partner. Trammell Crow and Phil Barshop and Sam Barshop went to the CEO of Roadway Inns and said, "We'd like to buy the whole thing. We think we can do it better. You're not growing this as fast as we are in the Southwest." And it was oil and water. It was an entrepreneur, the quintessential entrepreneur, trying to buy something from the quintessential corporate guy, and it was a disaster. That's the day that La Quinta was born in their minds, as they said, we'll just do it better with a Southwest flavor. So 1968 World's Fair was coming up that year. They built 2 of them right next to the World's Fair.
They're still there today.
They're still there. Yeah, but actually both of them are there today. And that is now an 800 chain hotel chain with 200 ancillaries that's now owned by Wyndham. But that company, so Dad in his 20s built a nice little empire, Roadway Inns. Before he turned 30, he went and started his first La Quinta. Before he turned 35, he had gone public with La Quinta. They went to the New York Stock Exchange before he turned 38. And then his dad dies. This is really the critical part of the story. Is his dad dies when he turns 40. So he went through a midlife crisis. He lost his best friend, his dad, his mentor, and who he, before he died, said was the greatest guy on earth he'd ever met. Every son should be able to say that.
How old were you at this time?
I was a freshman in college.
Okay.
Yeah. So Dad had to get the estate together. There's over 150 properties. He worked for $1 a year to help the family organize it, hire the right executives. They brought on a crack team of executives who started developing these lands that were at key intersections in San Antonio. And that became really an entree for him to figure out what he wanted to do with his next step. Because he had money, but he didn't know what to do. And he decided he wanted to start building bulk warehouses like they built with Trammell Crow 20 years earlier, but with a twist. And this is really a twist that changed San Antonio forever. The twist was, if you go to Orange County and see what they're doing with bulk warehouses there, you'll be embarrassed to come back to San Antonio and build what you used to build. So deed restrictions, restrictive covenants, putting berms in front of the parking, putting conceal walls to hide the electrical panels and the dumpsters, having sign control just like you do at high-end retail, to be very picky about your tenants, charge a little bit more, sandblast the concrete, do some paint features to make it really beautiful. If you do that kind of stuff, you blow away everything else going on in San Antonio. So everything changed.
So he saw what was going on in other cities where they were much more professional in the way that they ran their real estate holdings, the way that they operated the business, the processes. And he said, San Antonio is not doing this, so we're going to step it up.
Yeah, and I remember he's a 30-ish guy, late 30-ish guy, and he's got a pretty good network by this time in his life. So he contacted some of the equivalents of what he wanted to be in Orange County. And they said, hey, we have this organization called NAIOP. And it's our mind share. We call it today mind share groups, but it's the genius network that helps us figure out how to keep this consistent and be smart. And we're all over the country. We don't have anything in Texas. Dad brought NAIOP, and he got all the commercial real estate guys together. And this is the second innovative twist that nobody had thought of. So young guy still, and he said, why don't we all chip in $5 or $10,000, all of us developers, hire an executive director and really run this thing professionally so that the regulatory guys aren't going to kill us, because the fire marshals were eating them alive. The code guys were all eating them alive. They weren't getting projects open in time. So they worked more cooperatively with the city and got projects done faster. So
your dad is quoted, I kind of did some research on some of the things your dad was quoted as saying. He said, building La Quintas is fun. Managing La Quintas is not as much fun.
Yeah.
Obviously, he spent a lot of time at La Quintas. When you were growing up, did you spend a lot of time following him around? I grew up with my dad. We spent a lot of time on real estate properties, and I would go follow him around and watch what he would do, pick up trash, whatever. Did you ever spend time with your dad out on properties?
Well, he was smarter than that. So what he did was from a very early stage, I can remember I drove with him and my grandfather looking at real estate deals, learning the language, figuring out, everything. I didn't know what they were talking about the first 5 or 10 times, but by the 50th time, I knew everything they were talking about. So in high school, I knew what I wanted to be when I grew up, was commercial real estate. But the other thing is that my father, I worked in the summers at La Quinta, crummy jobs, and it got better, and then it got even better. And I got to actually, at 17 years old, manage 40 guys on a work crew. And it was awesome. It taught me how to be a boss, because my boss was Santa Claus and his wife were my boss. And they taught me how a couple loves each other, but they also taught me how to manage people. And so that's how I paid for my first little crummy first car, was working at La Quintas in the summertime.
It sounds like you hung out with your uncle and your dad in the car when you
my
guys
grandfather
were, and your grandfather.
Yeah, and my dad, yeah.
And so tell me this. There's an old adage that you become like the 5 people that you hang out with the most. You were hanging out with your dad. I hung out with my dad. I mean, that's really the whole model that I think I look back on. I go, that was the biggest influence on my life, is just watching my dad. Talk to me about that influence, that in looking back as you're celebrating the 20th anniversary of his death here next month. Tell me about the legacy of just hanging out and being around your father, and then looking back 20 years and go, yeah, this is still with me today.
Well, there was a book by Gail Sheehy called Passages, and it said that every mentor-mentee relationship's a 2-year deal. And a smart kid will figure out and suck all the juice out of that relationship, and then it gets sour. Well, I was with Dad for 2 years. My brother 2 years. My brother-in-law 2 years. My wife 2 years. We all worked with Dad for 2 years, and we all had him as a mentor. And he had 8 other mentees that didn't work under his employ like we did. So what I learned in those 2 years was probably equivalent to all the time I went driving with him. But you got to remember, so not only is he a real estate guy, he also did 1 or 2 other innovative things in the charity community. He was the first endowment for the Jewish community that is now tens of millions of dollars. He was the first guy to lead a campaign and give the largest gift in the campaign several times for the Jewish Community Center, which your future guest Ian Fisher will resonate with because he chaired that campaign for the next campus.
The new JCC. Yeah.
The new JCC. And then, so it's known as the Barshop Jewish Community Center. But there's he also did the same thing for Temple Bethel, the largest Jewish institution in San Antonio.
Yeah, beautiful campus.
He was a giver and an active guy raising money. And so he changed the whole, and then the leadership, when Israel went to war in 6-day war, the leadership was not going to do anything. And he went to the banks and said, me and my friends are going to guarantee several $100,000 loan. We want you to just send the money to Israel today, and we'll figure out how to raise the money later. The old guard wasn't going to do that. But the new young guys that had just discovered their Judaism became very bold, and they were like the new lions that replaced the old. So he did a lot of things that nobody would have done without him being there. So he was an instrumental part of the community, and he's still sorely missed 20 years later.
So that's a big part of you as well, as helping people. And you've chaired multiple capital campaigns. You went to San Antonio Academy. You were very involved with the United Way, among other causes. I think you were quoted somewhere saying that if I don't do it, if I don't lead this, it's not going to get done. Where does that attitude come from?
I can't tell you David Robinson's story. So David Robinson was one of our top prospects for San Antonio Academy. He had just transferred his kids there. And he, in case people don't know,
David Robinson, the old basketball player from...
Yeah, he won a championship, but he's also in the Hall of Fame, and he was an MVP.
Right.
He was a world-class player. He's a world-class human, too, and he was known for signing all the basketballs with Bible quotes. So when we went to David Robinson, we had a strategy session. I said, okay, I'm going to open and I'm going to close. You're going to do the middle, and you're going to thank him. So we all had our roles. And the goal was we were going to get $250,000. We were going to let him put quotes all over the school for religious nature, from Anonymous, and that was instead of having a room or a dedicated hall. I learned that from my dad. I learned that, when you go into a meeting, you go really well prepared, and you go, exactly what's going to happen. He was a master at preparedness. So he taught me that. Even in fundraising, you go in and you know what you're going to do. And David Robinson ended up giving a very nice gift. It wasn't $250, but it was pretty good. He ended up building a academy for young children in his neighborhood that was, I think he put $4 million into. So he had his project already, but he was very kind, and he did pick the naming opportunity.
So one other thing on that is, so if you walk into a room and you know exactly what to do, but even if you don't know what to do, you act like you know what you're going to do, it sounds like.
Well, Dad always kind of knew what to do. He knew the lay of the land. He knew the people politics. Right. He knew in any situation where it was going to go and how it should be handled and how to handle the objections. He was not a master salesman. He was pretty good at that, but he was kind of a visionary at seeing the future. He was at seeing where meetings were going.
So you and I both have been coached in life.
Mm-hmm.
We've had, you and I think, shared a common coach, Dan Sullivan,
mm-hmm.
strategic coach. Talking to people about being coached as a CEO of a company, it's frightening to a lot of people to think about being coached, have someone actually introspect about the way that they operate. Talk to me about being coached. For me, it's been awesome. It's been a major life changer.
I don't have all the answers. Do you have all the answers?
I don't have all the answers. That's why I hire people to help me.
So Dan Sullivan seems to know where he took me in a place of basically freedom. I was completely married to my business. I wasn't probably a very good father or a very good husband or a very good, friend to my friends, and I'm more complete now because of lessons that I learned from my coach. So now Dan Sullivan's too big a shot to teach little guys like me. I mean, you have to make several million a year to even get his attention now. But at the time he started his company, I was an early adopter, and I can't imagine my life how it would be if I didn't have that coaching.
I think that the interesting thing about coaching is it not only helps you with your business, but it helps you with your marriage life, with your kids, with family members, with just the way that you operate, the way that you value your own time.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that Dan had that I think was such a big challenge for me at the beginning was you have free days, right? You have specific days that you have to carve out where you don't work. You're not even allowed to check your email. Was that a big challenge for you?
At first, it was impossible. It's like, how in the world do you do that? And it went from 2 days a month to 4 days a month, and now it's about 15 days a month.
That's awesome. And then one other thing that I think is kind of a life hack that you heard from Woody Allen, which is 80% of success in life is just showing up. Do you believe that?
Yeah, there's 2 more parts to it. Show up on time, show up ready to play. So that's actually a 3-part quote. And 99% of the people won't do those 3 things.
Some of it, life is really almost that simple. If you can do some of those things, is it your view that, really a big chunk of the hardness of life is actually overcome when you...
Most don't come ready to play. They'll show up, and they might even show up on time. And that's another lesson Dad taught me. When I worked for him for 2 years, if I came to a meeting 1 minute late, I was locked out of the meeting. I could knock, I could beg, I could slip notes under the door. I couldn't get in the meeting. Yeah. It was a company meeting. It was just me and him and his right hand. But I was locked out. So I show up. I was here 20 minutes early for our meeting today. I try to come early to virtually every meeting now because just relax, get some things done.
Well, Ron, this has been fun. It's been an absolute blast interviewing you for this podcast. Love hearing about your family, the Barshop family. Very entrepreneurial, energetic, and also very giving. Thank you for giving your time today and being with me today.
Well, thanks for this project, Chris. It's a great project.